Right then, colleagues, I think we are up to the mark. So I'd like to welcome everyone here, anyone watching at home on YouTube, to this meeting of the Planning Committee of Newcastle-under-Lyme Borough Council. I'm going to take the agenda as published. And first I'll call for any apologies. And I know, Councillor Panther, you're standing in for Councillor Cooper, who's sent her apologies in. I don't think there are any other apologies we have this evening. So that being the case, let's progress to item 2 on our agenda, which is declarations of interest. Do any members wish to make such a declaration this evening? And again, I see silence, but I don't see silence. Of course, I hear silence. And therefore, I'm assuming that there are no such declarations. Let's progress to item 3 of our agenda, minutes of previous meetings, which are on this agenda printed for us. Are members content that they are a correct record of what there and then took place? And I see assent around the room. That therefore brings us to the first of our substantive items tonight, application for major development land south of Honeywell Lane. Now, on this item, I'd like to draw members' attention to the fact there is a supplementary agenda which has been published, so please be cognizant of that. And we have 2 speakers, I believe, on this. First, I'll call Councillor Gary White as ward member and then a supporter of the application. But just prior to that, I'm going to ask our officer if there's any extra information that everybody needs to be cognizant of before we begin.
There's nothing further to report, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In that case, I'm going to call our public speakers. The protocol for speaking has the order of ward councillor first, followed by the supporter of the scheme. Each of our speakers will have 5 minutes to address the committee. They'll be timed by the clerk, who sits to my right, and he will give an oral warning when 4 of those 5 minutes elapse to make sure that no vital points are missed. Though that will be the speaker's total contribution to our debate this evening. So on those terms, I first invite Councillor Gary White as ward member to address the committee. Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to take long on this. I certainly won't need the 5 minutes. I just want to really draw to members' attention the fact that both myself as the ward councillor and Madeley Parish Council are generally supportive of this application in terms of the location, the nature of it, and the number of houses. However, there has been, from our perspective, quite a substantial change which has been put in front of you, and that is in relation to the Section 106 agreement and monies. As you know, there is a standard policy that developers have to work to within this borough. And as part of that, there is an allocation per dwelling for Section 106 for public open space. And in this particular case, then that equates to £189,000. Now, that was allocated for the public open space in Madeley Heath, not far from the proposed development. And it was to upgrade the playground facilities, which are actually owned by the Borough Council, and also the neighbouring area, which is owned by the Parish Council. I think pertinent to this is the fact that the Parish Council has had numerous representations from the community over a number of years now regarding the lack of youth provisions and also the poor state of the general playground areas throughout the parish. And this was part of the strategy moving forward, was the key 106 money going to this. What is actually now before you is that all of that element is completely removed. So we've gone from a public space money of £189,000 to 0. And that is what I'm speaking against. We don't believe it's fair. We don't believe it's right. We don't believe it's just. We understand that there is a financial equation to be had. and we understand that a separate financial appraisal has been undertaken by your officers. But at the end of the day, the 106 money is there for a reason. And I'd also draw your attention to the fact that the only 106 that is allowed as part of this submission is going entirely to the secondary schools. So what I'm asking is for you to consider whether or not that is right. And also, if you believe that the reduction in the 106 overall is right, can you actually be a bit fairer as a committee and reallocate some of those funds more appropriately rather than what is in the current report? And the last thing I'd like to say is that in talking to people and members generally, I've become aware that this isn't the first time this has happened to an application. And if this is an ongoing issue, then I would draw your attention to the fact we may need to look at this policy again. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor. I'll now call on our second public speaker this evening, Mr. Andrews, who I hope is with us in the virtual waiting room, to address the committee on exactly the same terms. So, first of all, Mr. Andrews, are you there? And secondly, do begin when you feel comfortable to do so.
Good evening. Good evening. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, that's absolutely fine.
Great. Okay. I'm ready to start when you are, Chair.
Yes, please begin when you want to.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for allowing us to speak at this evening's committee meeting. It's a great pleasure to be given the opportunity to present our exciting proposals here this evening. My name is Chris Andrews from Andmore Homes Group, and we are the house builder bringing forward this application, along with our team of friends, collaborators, partners and advisors. This reserved matters application that we are delighted is recommended for approval is for 34 of the 35 dwellings, which were previously approved as an outline planning consent. Alongside this, a variation to the section 106, which has been subject to a thorough viability review process. We would welcome guidance as to how the contributions can be spent. We note that the principle of providing residential developments at the sites has been secured through the outline planning consent, and this application focuses on bringing forward a high quality design-led proposal. The proposal in front of you today for the 34 homes is the result of over 12 months of detailed pre-application discussions with the council and has evolved through many iterations of the scheme, layout and design. During this period, we have visited some of the most successful recent residential schemes in the UK, including the award-winning Marmalade Lane scheme in Cambridge. This looks to put community and placemaking at its heart. It has won several national design awards and has been a hugely successful scheme in terms of placemaking. This same value sits at the heart of our scheme, and we are really pleased with our proposals here today. We are now confident that the proposed development is of exceptionally high quality, balancing the needs of the council, local community, future residents and the environment. We invested a lot of work into the layout and design, and it really is different from a standard housing layout. We are seeking to deliver a scheme which uses high quality materials and adopts character areas, which we call the lane, the commons, which also includes some open green space with fruit trees, the yards, and the green terrace, which provides further green space for residential amenity. We have developed the design to have a clear orthogonal arrangement, with the benefits of this rationale and efficient layout giving us our open spaces for our residents. The layout generates our distinct character areas, providing varied family accommodation and a consistent architectural theme running throughout the development. We have consulted on technical matters with Highways and have an agreed refuse collection strategy, along with agreements of matters such as parking, boundary treatment, bike storage, etc., which are also resolved and incorporated into the design that is being considered tonight. The proposals are sustainable and include a significant south-facing landscaping terrace, which is a unique feature in a residential development such as this. This residence asset, along with the overall design of the layout, looks to bring the residents together with an opportunity for social spaces, grow your own allotments and other activities. And that will help to support the community aspirations we have. And we see this as a wonderful opportunity for residents to flourish and create a place we can all be proud of. We have undertaken an extensive pre-application process and held meetings with the council, and also have undertaken a design review panel review with Urban Vision in April 2020. This we found to be a very useful and productive exercise. The panel was supportive of our overall design ethos and creation of our character areas, and felt that there was an opportunity to develop the space to the south of the site to be an integral part of the scheme. These comments have been taken into consideration and have enhanced the scheme considerably and resulted in the development of our green terrace. As part of the planning process, we have undertaken community consultation, albeit due to the COVID-19 pandemic, not as interactive as we would like.
1 minute.
We prepared a presentational flyer and issued this to neighbouring properties, informing them of the proposals and seeking their views prior to submission of an application. The parish council were also consulted at the pre-application stage. Our planning application put before you this evening, which is recommended for approval, is of high quality in nature and accords with the development plan. And we look forward to continuing to work with the council and local key stakeholders to deliver these exciting homes for the local community. Finally, I would like to thank the officers for working closely with us, and also for the members for the opportunity to speak this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrews. Now, before I open the item for debate, I'll ask our officer whether he wishes to comment on anything that's been said so far.
Thank you. Yes, Chair, please. Section 6 of the officer's report deals with the planning obligations and financial viability. Much of what Councillor White said was correct. I just wanted to pick up on the point about the independent financial advice that's now being received. That's set out in 6.3 of the officer's report. That is independent financial advice that we've obtained, and but as John B have confirmed, that the scheme can only financially support the £83,110 that 110 that's been set out in the agenda. As to where that financial contribution goes to, is for debate and is for members to decide. The reasons why the officers have recommended that that portion of money goes to secondary school education places is purely on the basis of to mitigate the impact of the development. As members will be aware, the purpose of the financial contribution should be primarily to mitigate the impact of the proposed 34 dwellings. The council has no agreed formal hierarchy of need, so it's just a judgment basis. As I said, the officer recommendation is based on the comments received from the Education Authority, who had advised that secondary school places is the priority in this particular area. And Madeley High School in particular has an approved expansion project to be delivered by September 2023. So the 83,000, circa 83,000 would be spent on that project and mitigate or go some way to mitigating the 5 additional high school places created by the development. Alongside that, when considering where that money should be spent, officers have taken into account that the development does propose on-site informal open space, which obviously would be used by future residents and mitigate the impact on Heath Road. So that is the reason behind why officers have have suggested and recommended to members that the circa 83,000 goes to secondary school places. But as I mentioned, if members decide that a proportion of that money should go to public open space, then they can obviously make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, before I open the item for discussion, I just draw to members' attention there is a revised recommendation on our supplementary agenda, albeit I think it's fair to say the substance of that recommendation remains the same. So I invite comment from members. Councillor Reddish.
It's a question, really. I'm just trying to think about the open space that Councillor White is talking about. Is it an open space that's owned by the council? Is it maintained by the parish council? Or just a bit of clarification, because in my mind there's a question mark.
Yeah, I believe it's maintained by the parish council.
Councillor Holland.
Councillor White is forbidden from contributing further to this meeting, but he is shaking his head. So I take that to mean that the space in question is not maintained by the parish council. And I wonder if anybody else in the room is able to give an answer to that question. At outline stage, as an authority, we determined that in order for this development to be acceptable, it should include this £5,579 per dwelling towards the maintenance of open land and facilities. I don't see necessarily that that's changed. We're not allowed to secure Section 106 agreements where they're not necessary. You know, they would be necessary at the time. So my question, I suppose, is if the lack of that makes the scheme unviable, then the scheme's unviable. Why should we be approving something where the developer gets their end of things, the local community doesn't? And as a committee, we're being asked to approve the reserved matters and also an amendment to the S106 agreement by which we are expected to divvy up what remains of the contribution that our independent financial advisor has told us is still possible for the developer to contribute. I have to say, the advice we've received from Butters John B, the figure they've come up with is £83,110, which is precisely the amount of money related to the provision of secondary school spaces. Have they really done any maths, or have they just picked the sum that is on the paper? Because I would want to push harder on our advisors, and certainly to get the full value out of them, and say, hang on, if the amount that is justifiable, if the amount that you've calculated is £84,000, then we want £84,000, so we can spend some of that money on primary school places or some of that money on green open spaces. And we're being asked now to decide how we might wish to spend what meagre pittance has been allocated. And in that context, I would consider it valuable to ask, really, is 83,000 the number, or could the number be slightly higher than that?
We've got three further speakers, but before that, I don't want the questions to get lost in the numbers. So I'll just ask our officer if he wishes to reply to the points Councillor Holland's made. Then we'll take Councillor Williams.
Well, the only point that I can respond to is that of who maintains or owns the public open space. I did obtain the views of our landscape development section, and they advised me that it was the parish council. Unfortunately, we haven't got an officer from the landscape development section here to confirm that, but that is the advice that I received prior to the committee meeting.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the space we talk about, the children's play area, am I right in saying it's across the busy main road and the other side of in Madeley Heath? I can't think of any play area on the development side of on the development side. Just we don't know how much land that it's been indicated that the development is going to leave for children to play, but it's a very tight development piece of land with that lane running down. And I know at the bottom of the lane is quite a lot of marshy land, and it's quite dangerous down there. So, I mean, that's probably for future meeting if we come back to this meeting. But go back to the open space. We've been here before, Mr. Chairman, haven't we? Especially with the big developers, and I'm thinking of in Kidsgrove, where a multi-million-pound developer, we had to, well, the independent valuer said they couldn't afford to pay for open space, and we lost that open space. Really sad about that. Well, disgusted. In fact, I'm not disgusted, but on this particular decision not to enhance the local play area, which again is across the other side of the road. Am I right in saying that? That's the question, Mr. Chairman. And also a piece of land that's allocated by the developer for open space on this development. So really, can them questions before we make that decision to forego on the 106 monies for local park. Thank you.
And I'll ask our officer to respond, and then we'll move to Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the Heath Road play area is within easy walking distance from the site for future residents to access that, but it is across the busy road. I don't think so.
My recollection is there is not. No. Councillor Northcott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quite frankly, I'm disgusted at this. The community's been asked to take 34 houses. We all know that, okay, the school is a proviso in terms of capacity, but what makes up a community isn't just the school, isn't just a primary school, isn't just a secondary school. It's a community, all said and done. And Councillor Holland has taken some of my words, stolen my thunder, so to speak, is that I think really that when developers come forward with schemes like this, they ought to look at ones that are viable and still include the contributions to the community. I don't think that's fair just to change the goalposts at a later stage when the community has already looked forward to possibly spending and plans to do that, which takes some doing in its planning. So I would suggest that the developer, I can't support this. I suggest that the developer goes back, looks at his figures and brings forward a scheme which is viable and meets with the contribution requirements that are put in place for a very good reason, with the contributions to the community open space that other developers have to pay. This isn't a universal decision, but the guidelines that are set out for us as a committee and members to decide upon is the very fact that the contributions are expected for each development housing that is put on a parcel of land. And I don't think we should deviate from that course, because if we do, we're going to be running a slippery slope where every single developer will want to come back and say that their scheme isn't viable in order to increase their profit margins. And I think that is wholly unfair on communities to accept the brunt of housing when they're not getting any benefits from it other than school requirements. So that's my opinion, Chair, for what it's worth. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, I find the 106 contributions, in particular around education contributions, quite opaque. It seems that the contributions to schools depends entirely on the timing at the point of development. It doesn't account for properties. There's no contribution for primary schools of some very large developments across where I am, and with no contribution to those primary schools, much larger developments, but with contributions to the secondary schools. And now that these houses have been realised, there's actually very few or very little pressure on the secondary school provision and quite acute pressure on the primary school provision. So I find it very opaque. When I was a county councillor, I did ask that perhaps the division councillor could see these 106 statements before they went to planning, which I think would give an opportunity to sense check. I feel for the ward councillor in this, because quite often when developments come forward in our wards, we get bombarded with emails and phone calls, and it's, when we go back to our residents and say, as part of this, we've secured or the council is going to secure improvements to the green spaces. And then, as we see all too often, the developer comes back in, claims financial issues with that 106 contribution and gets the 106 contribution reduced, which I do agree I find quite galling. I find the whole nature around it quite opaque. I think, you know, for many of us, we can see that the housing market is actually very buoyant. The value of houses is going up. So it becomes a very difficult thing for us to be able to sell to our residents. So I'm in agreement with the comments that have been put forward previously, that actually I think it's down to the developer to come back with a proposal that meets those requirements that we set during the original development. They weren't set for just for sake. They were set because they were sound, logical contributions that were required in order to make this a reasonable development. You know, we spend so much time as a committee dealing with 106s after the fact, chasing down 106 contributions for open spaces. We've spent years trying to get the open spaces on a development on the former pit site in Silverdale sorted. That's a waste of this council's time. We need to send the applicant back and say, come back to us with a viable proposal that meets what we initially said to you, and then maybe we can look at it again.
Councillor Panter, then Councillor Moffat.
Thank you, Chair. I'll speak on this both as a councillor and as a Madeley resident. I do support the comments of Councillors White, Northcote and Holland. I noticed in 6.6 of this briefing, it says primary school places at John Offley School and Madeley High School, but nothing at all to do with Madeley Heath Primary School, which is full to capacity. And in fact, I think he's sending some of their primary classes to Madeley High School either this term or in the next 12 months. So I'm just wondering, firstly, if that 83,000, is any of that going to go to the primary school places from Madeley Heath School? Other than that, Chair, I'm afraid I must endorse the comments of the other councillors on this matter. I think the provision of this 106 money needs thorough revision and should be sent back to the developers for doing so.
Councillor Moffat.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to thank the councillor and the developer for their presentations. I think it's really important to remember that Councillor White did say that overall people were really supportive of this development, and I think the developer spoke very eloquently about lots of very positive aspects. But like other councillors who said on this planning group, very often we give permission for developments to happen. We believe at the time that the Section 106 is what's going to happen. And as Councillor Jones was saying, as ward councillors, we often have conversations with the local community talking about the benefit of those Section 106 obligations. I simply don't understand what has changed so much that it's less than half of what was originally earmarked. And I do completely agree with Councillor Holland that the figure offered is exactly the same figure that was identified for the secondary school in the first place, which, you know, I don't want to be a suspicious kind of character, but it makes me feel that this hasn't been looked at in as serious a way as possible. I would like to see the developer go back to the drawing board a bit and come a bit closer to what the promise was originally. And I think, you know, we're all in favour of seeing really good homes come into the borough. But I think we also, as an authority, need to be very firm that when we support developments like this, that we're then not going to further along the line have to dilute and reduce the benefit, the broader benefit to our communities. So I really don't feel tempted at all to support this the way it stands. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Now, before we go on, a couple of things have struck me, which I'd like to ask our officers to make sure that our debate is going on the right tracks. The first thing is, when we look at our supplementary agenda, we see that there are 3 recommendations in front of us, A, B and C. Now, our debate has focused very firmly, and I'm sure many colleagues would say quite rightly, on the reduction in the S106 contribution. We have had no discussion at all of anything to do with recommendation C, which is about the actual development. Now, what I'm hearing from the committee is a great dislike, I think that's not an unfair way of characterising it, I'm sure I'll be put right if it is, of recommendations A and B. What I'd like to ask our officers is, if the committee is minded to reject recommendations A and B, where does that leave recommendation C? Can the committee accept that, or are these things to be rejected en bloc if they are to be rejected? I think that would be useful for committee members to have in their minds as we proceed.
Thank you, Chairman. It does. All of the 3 recommendations are intertwined. So if you decide that you're not comfortable with the monetary sum that's being put forward, the 108 or the sort of 83,000, nor are you happy with the targeting of that to the school, then the whole sort of scheme effectively falls. So the detailed conditions as set out in Part C are non-applicable, because at the heart of it, the variation of the 106 isn't taken forward. So we couldn't recommend approval on that basis if you resisted on that point. But on the side of viability, it does present us as officers with a challenge. The Planning Inspectorate have often looked at this challenge of shorter sort of contributions that fall short of what was anticipated by policy. And the long-held view is that the government have prioritised the delivery of housing over the sort of 106 package. Now, on some elements, they think that, yes, there are priorities that must be met. But on other Section 106 elements, the government have taken a more flexible view on that, as expressed through the Planning Inspectorate. And things like open space, affordable housing have, at public appeals, been sort of said to be put back, and the scheme allowed with that reduced package of Section 106 payments. It has been dependent on the viability assessment that's been undertaken, and the work undertaken by Butters John B, we understand, has met the requirements for an open book assessment. So at the moment, we don't have any evidence to say that Butters John B have got their maths wrong, and we can challenge on that point. I do, though, sympathise with the view that it's strange that secondary school contribution and the money available happen to be exactly the same. That's a strange coincidence, but the maths might take it. And Nick can comment.
Yeah, the reason why the 83,110 is being highlighted and concluded by Butters John B. The developer, the applicant, submitted the application on the basis that the scheme couldn't support any contributions whatsoever. It was only when we sought independent advice from Butters John B that they concluded they didn't agree with the figures that were presented by the developer, and they concluded that with the subtle changing of certain abnormal costs, etc., and construction costs, that the scheme could support some level of contribution. And it was at that point where negotiations carried on, and they obviously a figure close to 83,000 was suggested by Butters John B, and we looked at the financial contributions that were secured at the outline stage, and just a general discussion resulted in that what would be the priorities in the area, and that's when we engaged with the Education Authority to see whether they had any specific projects that would help to mitigate this development, and it was those that were highlighted at Madeley High School, and that's when the 83,000 110 was then put to the developer to say would they be willing to make the development work to achieve that figure. So that's why that figure has been presented on that basis. Obviously, if members feel that the scheme should go back to Butters John B to reevaluate, then the application can be deferred tonight for that to take place, and a future report, once those further discussions have taken place, can be presented. But I just wanted to give a bit of rationale and justification for why that figure is the figure presented. Thank you.
Thank our officers for that. I just want to explore something else before I know Councillor Williams wishes to speak again, because now the question of deferral has been raised, and that I think again is something that perhaps members might want to think about. My question, going on from what Mr. Fleet I think very helpfully said, is that if we are minded to refuse this, we must refuse all of the recommendations in front of us. Obviously, all those who apply have a right of appeal. Would I be correct in saying that were there to be such an appeal, and were the appellant to win their appeal, that the sum of £83,110 going to secondary school provision would still stand in that regard? In other words, would the appeal be with the understanding that that contribution would happen, or would that contribution be lost as a process in the appeal?
Yeah, I think it would stand, subject to, obviously, as part of the appeal process, the new section 106 being completed.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel very uncomfortable with the decision by the officers, really, and looking at deferral. I mean, why I say that, because 6 has been pointed out, 6.6 on the agenda. Affordable housing, there's no affordable housing. All the money is going to, all the 106 monies are going to the high school. No money to the primary schools, no money to play area, no affordable housing, which we've fought long and hard to get developers to do affordable housing. And I think, memory serves me right, in other cases where we had to let off on some of the 106 monies, we have actually had affordable housing in that. We've actually gained something, affordable housing in this, really. It's just that I don't, anyway, we're getting into trust now, aren't we? The education, staff's education. So I'm looking for the deferral, Mr. Chairman. I think let's let them come back. The independent valuer, it's just the officers are doing this, setting the, looking at the development and its costings and that. It's an independent valuer, so I think we should go back to the independent valuer, or trying to work out why this money is just going to the high school. Thank you.
I think, Councillor, again, that if and our officers will correct me if I'm wrong in saying this. There are two debates here. I mean, one debate is that we feel that the independent valuer has not done the work sufficiently well, and we are looking for a revision on that, and perhaps a revision of the figure. The other question here, though, is if we accept that the independent valuer has correctly assessed the situation, it is in the power of this committee to divide that money up in different ways this evening. In other words, were the committee to feel that some of those monies should be given to open space provision, affordable housing, and so forth, the committee could decide that. Now, that may be something members feel appropriate. On the other hand, of course, the problem is if the cake is quite small, in the opinion of individuals, slicing that cake means that every contribution is equally small. And you might say that frittering small sums of money is a less benefit than giving a sum of money to one thing. So one of the things I think the committee needs to decide this evening is whether it feels that this sum of money is sufficient. If it does, and I stress the if at that point, whether it feels that the allocation of those monies as proposed here is correct. It is in the power of this committee to change that allocation were it to choose to do so. On the other hand, we may feel that this is simply wrong, and I would look at that point for a motion of refusal, or we may feel that we would like the independent reviewer to think a little bit more carefully about what they've done, in which case I suppose we'd be looking for a motion of deferral. Those, I think, are the options that the committee has. Again, if I've put my foot in it, I hope our officers will extract said foot. But as I see it, those are the things that the committee could do this evening.
Thank you. Can I move deferral? One thing just occurred to what you just said, Mr. Chairman. What kind of 34 dwellings? What type of dwellings? We don't. Does the officer know what type of developments? Are they terrace, or are they independent? Are they semi-detached? Are they detached? 3-story detached? And that goes a long way in the saleable land. What's it worth? So if we refuse it, I don't know. I'll go deferral, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Move deferral.
I think I'm correct, Councillor, in saying that we do know what the application looks like in that shape or form. But I look for a seconder for that. But before then, Councillor Holland.
Councillor Williams may need the contents of his application to be refreshed for him, and I'm sure that officers can give answers to his questions. But I would disagree with deferring a decision on this application, because, as has been discussed, the reason for that deferral would be to seek further advice from the independent valuer. I'm not sure that would be necessarily beneficial. I certainly can't conceive of a circumstance in which the independent valuer goes away and comes up with a number that is remotely close to the number that was agreed at outline stage. So on that basis, I would be inclined to move refusal, because the cake is too small. It's the cake, as we initially asked for, is too large for the scheme to be viable. And if the scheme is not viable, then the scheme should not go ahead, and the developer should go away and come back with another application, which is both viable and acceptable in planning terms, because that's what S106 agreements do. They make an application acceptable in planning terms. So having heard what you've said, Chair, about the inextricable link between recommendations A, B, and C, while I am content with recommendation C, I cannot vote for recommendations A and B, and I move refusal.
Councillor Northcote, then Councillor Moffat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Likewise, following Councillor Holland, I would be okay with recommendation C, but I think we should be firm in sending the message that when we expect developers to come to planning application stage, that they consider things in the round. This clearly isn't the right pathway, and I think is wrong. So I will be mindful to support for refusal, to support Councillor Holland's recommendation for refusal. Of course, if we had a community infrastructure levy agreement, this wouldn't be on the table now, because we would be a more stronger guideline in terms of where monies are to go to in terms of developments. So on that basis, I support for refusal, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Moffat.
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with Councillors Holland and Northcote. I think we're in real danger of the S106 obligations of just being kind of a bit of a fantasy. I think that we need to be really firm that when developers are coming into the borough and exciting us with ideas of what it is that they will build and the benefits, that we need to be really strict and not to have to keep coming back and seeing applications to waive those initial obligations. I think it's really important, particularly when we have the local plan upon our heads, that we really support the S106s and make sure that our communities benefit from the developments that are happening in our areas. So I support Councillor Holland's move to refuse.
Any further contributions from the floor before I try to procedurally sort out what we're going to do next? Well, first of all, indeed, Councillor Holland. Well, I think that's right, Councillor Reddish. I think it's not really good to see things fall because of lack of a seconder. So we will have a vote, I think, first on deferral. Then we need to think about the formulation of what Councillor Holland wants to say. I'm assuming, Councillor, that what you're saying is that what is proposed here, the monies that are proposed are not sufficient to mitigate the impacts of this development on the local community, and that is the reason you are opposing the application. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, Chair, that is how I would formulate it.
I think our officer wishes to comment before we move to a vote, and again, it would be wrong, I think, to suppress those comments. Mr. Fleet.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, at the moment, what we would like to have the opportunity to do, if the application were deferred, is to go back to the applicant and really squeeze this section 106. As Nick has said, he's already worked hard with the applicant to try and get to one of those sort of thresholds marked in the original agreement, and we've looked at the scheme. We can go back again and see how much more there can be done. Maybe it's a retweak of the design, maybe it's some of the sort of properties, and we can look at what's expected out of that and really take that to the nth degree. There is the potential we could be coming back to committee with an enhanced offer. I don't expect it's going to be back to where the original 2017 outline was, but hopefully it's in a stronger position than where it is tonight. Clearly, the weight that members are giving on this obligations, the package, and how important that is to the community has clearly been expressed, and that's something that would be taken back to the applicant, that it's a long way short at the moment. But if it were to be refused at the moment, what is on the table, the 83,000, is what would go to the inspectorate. If we can get something, we could possibly be looking at a better figure than that. I can offer no guarantees that there is more money in the kitty. Some of that work, a lot of that work has already been done, but given the weight of opinion being expressed, I feel comfortable putting more officer time into trying to squeeze that even more. Thank you, Chair.
So again, I look for any further contributions to the floor. We've got two motions in front of us, one for deferral and one for straightforward refusal. Any last contributions before I put the first of those votes? Could I then please see those who are in favour of deferring this item? And I see 5. I look to my clerk to see if that's correct. I see those against, please. And I think I see 6. Am I again correct in saying that? So that motion falls. Could I therefore see those for refusal of this item for the reasons stated? I see 8. I think my clerk agrees with me. I shouldn't say our clerk agrees with me. And could I see those against that, please? And I would add my voice to that, so that would be 3, but nonetheless, that item is clearly refused. We can therefore progress to item 5 on our agenda. Again, I think we have a supplementary report with a revised recommendation, so I do draw members' attention to that fact. And I now just again ask our officer whether there's any further information before I ask a public speaker to address us.
Nothing further to add at this stage. Thanks, Chair.
In that case, we do have a public speaker, I believe Mr. Stocks, to address us on this matter. I hope he's again with us in the virtual waiting room, and since some time has elapsed, I'll just outline again briefly the speaking protocol. Mr. Stocks will have 5 minutes to address the committee. They will be timed by the clerk, who sits to my right. After 4 of those minutes have elapsed, the clerk will give Mr. Stocks an oral warning to make sure no vital points are missed out, and that will be, his 5 minutes will be his sum contribution to our proceedings this evening. So I see Mr. Stocks is with us. So on those terms, whenever you're ready, Mr. Stocks, please do address the committee.
Thank you. Can I just confirm you can hear me fine? Good. Well, thank you, councillors, and thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. I'm Matthew Stocks from WSP. We are the agents and planning consultants working on behalf of the applicant, Harworth. And I'm speaking to you now in relation to both applications on this evening's agenda relating to the Chatley Valley development site. This is the next 2 items. You'll recall previously seeing plans for this site in 2019, where you supported officers' recommendations to grant a hybrid planning permission for the redevelopment of this key employment site. And then again at the start of 2020, you supported proposed amendments to that planning permission. An outline planning permission now covers the whole site for primarily industrial and distribution warehouse employment uses, and a full permission covers earthworks on the northern part of the site. The applications before you firstly comprise a full application for earthworks on the southern part of the site, and secondly an amendment application for the existing hybrid permission. This seeks to provide a slightly different proposed site layout with reconfigured plots, and to amend some conditions to allow for maximum flexibility for potential occupiers, and also to allow a phased approach to development. The applications are inextricably linked and allow for earthworks across the whole site to commence. I'm pleased to today reaffirm Harworth's commitment to delivering the redevelopment of this key allocated development site in Newcastle. And over the past 18 months, Harworth have been in discussions with Staffordshire County Council and Newcastle-under-Lyme Council economic development teams for an advanced ceramics campus. And as such, Harworth have had the confidence to move forward with a first speculative building on the site, and we hope to progress a reserve matters application for that first construction phase in due course. As the name Chatley Valley suggests, the site presents technical challenges given its topography, and a substantial earthworks programme needs to get underway first to bring the site forward. The proposals in front of you, with a slightly revised layout and tweaking of conditions to allow for a phased approach, intend to allow for earthworks to get underway as soon as possible next year, and then for a building or buildings to be constructed and occupied as soon as possible thereafter. Whilst the past 18 months have evidently presented significant challenges for all, the market is buoyant for industrial units at the moment, and Harworth are confident that this scheme is deliverable in the current climate. Should these applications in front of you be approved, Harworth are looking to start on site at the beginning of 2022. The earthworks will take 2 seasons. However, the proposed site layout means that the earliest building plots would be available for occupiers at the end of 2022. And as I noted, the speculative building would be undertaken directly by Harworth, and that should therefore be constructed and available by the end of 2023, whilst the rest of the earthworks are ongoing. So one of the points to highlight to the committee is that the proposed layout will mean that the potential for rail freight access or a rail passenger station is no longer safeguarded. Harworth have been actively marketing the site, and there's been no viable market interest in a rail connected employment use, and no demand or capacity for a rail passenger station. A key reason for this is likely that there's only a short window at night time for access onto the West Coast main line, as access during the day is severely compromised because of the speed differences between freight and passenger trains. And this case has been accepted by officers. In terms of the update note, which you've got to the committee, you'll note that we want to get sufficient flexibility to allow us to finalise the wording of conditions with the planning officer. Thank you. With the planning officer Elaine Moulton following the committee, but prior to the decision being finalised and issued, and that all links to getting on site as soon as possible. I hope that you agree with the planning department's recommendation to grant approval of the two applications. We've been discharging conditions over the past couple of months, and approval today of the applications in front of you will mean that works can start on site at the start of next year. We'll be happy to take on board any queries or comments from councillors as part of your discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stocks. From what you said, I take it you will not wish to speak a second time. I will formally have to take these items separately, and there'll be separate votes on them. Am I correct in thinking you've said what you feel is necessary this evening?
That is correct, unless the opportunity can be taken to assist with any queries in the next slot. But otherwise, I'm happy with that.
I'm afraid we can't do Q&A. You can simply address the committee. What I will do, perhaps, because it is your right, is when we finish with item 5, I will just briefly ask again. Don't feel obliged one way or the other, but whether you wish to address the committee a second time.
That's appreciated. Thank you.
So before we move to debate, again, I'll just ask our officer if there's anything we need to hear beforehand. I've got a slight buzz on this thing now. I'm not quite sure why, but I think I'm still audible. But just ask our officer to comment.
No comments at this stage, thank you.
So I open the item 4 comment. And again, let's stick please to application number 5 to start with, and then we'll move through them. We formally need to take a vote on both of them. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I go along with the recommendation. It's good to see jobs coming to the borough. But two things. I'm really pleased about the sidings. Am I right in saying I did hear right that the sidings are protected, the rail sidings are protected?
I think, in fact, Councillor, the reverse was said to be the case. I look to our officers to confirm that I've heard that correctly.
Yes, that is correct, Chair. The nature of the earthworks that are being proposed within this application would mean that there is no safeguarding of that rail connection. That would be lost if planning permission was given for the application before you tonight. The applicant has indicated that they have they've marketed the site extensively and have not had any viable approaches from employers who wish to have rail connections, and yeah, whilst there's been some interest from rail companies, that hasn't resulted in any viable approach, and whatever demand that there was has been met elsewhere. So the proposal is to carry out engineering works, and the opportunity to gain access to the railway line from this development site would be lost if this permission is granted. And it is referred to within the report that the balancing exercise that has been done is that the bringing forward of employments on this site, which has been a site that has had planning permission for a considerable number of years without any employment development taking place. The prospect of bringing forward that employment development outweighs the harm arising from the loss of the opportunity to provide a connection to the railway line.
Yeah, could I come back, Mr. Chairman?
You can indeed, Councillor. The relevant section of the report is in fact 2.5 and 2.6.
Yeah, Longport Station is not a million miles away, and these sidings were put in for the coal extraction, the open cast that happened in Torque. So the other point is the the public right of way on our map. The Borough map, it shows the path going right across the site and going to the JCB buildings. I suspect that's been suspended a few years ago. And the other public, that's on our map. On the maps I've looked at today, that is not on. The only right of way runs parallel with the 500 and goes out to Bottom Farm. It just comes, so it runs along the western side of the site and then shoots up to Bottom Farm as it says on the map, but the other one isn't gone. So I agree with the footpath officer, Staffordshire footpath officer, that needs to be protected. Thank you.
Councillor Reddish.
Thank you. Happy to support this recommendation. Just want to make sure that we don't lose the amendment about category B trees being retained. So I'd like to make sure that we do include that amended condition, should we approve it. At the bottom of the supplementary.
Yes, that is being addressed within the revised recommendation set out in the supplementary report, and it is that recommendation that we're asking members to make a decision upon, not the one on the main agenda report.
Councillor Panther.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit I'm not familiar with this area, but what I am concerned about most considerably is the number of proposed HGV movements per day. And the penultimate paragraph on page 5, it says 400. And yet to condition 9 above, it says no more than 250. I think 400 is certainly horrendous. And my recommendation would be to keep with condition 9 at no more than 250 at the most.
The recommendation for 400 with some further limitations during the peak hours is based upon the advice of Highways England. It's the impact of those vehicular movements on the Torque roundabout and the link to the A500, which is part of the strategic highway network and within the control of Highways England. They've considered this very carefully, and they have revised their advice to lift that number from the 250 movements that they initially recommended to the 400 movements per day, with the additional restrictions in the morning and afternoon peak hours. So they are satisfied as the relevant highway authority, and as officers we have no basis upon which to disagree with the Highways England as to the appropriateness of those levels of movement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do appreciate the comments made by your case officer. I still think it's rather high, but I have to go with the flow.
Any further comments from members before I put this item to the vote? In that case, can I see please those in favour of the recommendations? And I think that is unanimous. We can then progress to item 6. I think I ought to, since he is asked and has a right to speak if he wishes to do so. Mr. Stocks, whether he wishes to speak again. I see, oh, he's come back.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have anything else to add at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll progress to item 6. Again, I'll ask our officer if there's anything extra we need to know before we move to determining this application.
No, there's nothing further to add. Thank you.
So again, I invite comment from members. I see no comments, so could I see please those in favour of the recommendation? And again, I think that's unanimous. Now, time is marching on, and I am aware that we have another public speaker for us. So I think what I'm going to do is exercise my power in the chair and move the agenda around so that we will address item 11, where we have Miss Swindles who wishes to address her, rather than leave her for another half hour, maybe longer, sitting there. That said, I hope she is in the electrical waiting room. If she isn't, we will wait and keep the order. But otherwise, before we do that, could I just ask our officer if there's any further information on agenda item 11 that we should be cognizant of before we proceed?
Nothing at this stage. I'm happy to respond to any questions that may arise during debate. Thank you.
In that case, if Miss Swindles is there, I would invite her to address the committee on the terms that I've previously stated as regards agenda item 11. Ms Swindles.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check that my audio is okay with everybody?
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak today, Chair, and thank you for moving that agenda around. That's very much appreciated. This is an application to modify a planning obligation under Section 106A of the Town and Country Planning Act to allow additional time for development to substantially commence without the need for a reappraisal of the viability of the site. As members will appreciate, this is a very complicated brownfield site which has required heavy remediation and the extinguishment of a burning spoil heap and associated works. This issue is central to the very special circumstances for granting planning permission for the proposed development. Our client has made substantial progress with the decontamination and remediation of the site in order to get the site ready for development by the appointed development partner, which we can now confirm is to be Seddon Homes. This has required a substantial amount of work by the applicants and approval by the Council's Environmental Health Department and the Environment Agency. As acknowledged in the report from your officers, these factors were compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic, resulting in delays to both decision-making and work on site. The process to date has taken a considerable amount of time, hence a request for a further extension of time to enable the remediation to be completed and development to substantially commence. I have little else to add to the conclusions of your officers. However, I would like to clarify two issues that have been raised by both Keele Parish Council and Silverdale Parish Council. Firstly, Keele Parish Council raised the matter that no buyer for the site has been found. In response to this, I can confirm now that the landowners have exchanged contracts with Seddon Homes, the developer for the nearby Hawthorns development. Seddon Homes will shortly be submitting an application under Section 73 of the Town and Country Planning Act to vary the approved house types to correspond with their own house site range and are committed to delivering homes on this site. Secondly, both parish councils have raised the matter of the surface water drainage scheme. A detailed surface water drainage scheme has been submitted to the council for approval to discharge condition 28 of the outline planning permission. However, this is yet to be approved by the lead local flood authority. The main reason that this is yet to be approved by the lead local flood authority is because at the time they considered the details of the drainage scheme, there was no named developer in place. The wording of condition 28 is such that the approved dwellings cannot be constructed until the surface water drainage details are approved by the council. In any event, as correctly stated by your officers, the matter of the drainage details is not a matter that is relevant or material to the determination of this application under Section 106A of the Town and Country Planning Act. The approval of this application will create certainty, will allow Seddon Homes to take the site forward, and would deliver much needed housing numbers for the area and improve the appearance of a derelict and blighted site, enhancing the local environment for the benefit of the local community. Thank you for your time, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before again I open the item for discussion, I'll just ask our officers if there is anything we need to comment on, and then I'll take Councillor Jones.
No, not at this stage, thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. So this site, I know members of the Planning Committee are probably quite familiar with this site. It's certainly something that went through quite a long process when the initial planning was granted. Obviously, there was some very stringent requirements in order to commence development within the site, and that's fully understandable with the permission that was granted way before I was a member of this committee, in fact, before I was a councillor. I will say that I do find that this whole situation to be rather difficult, given that planning permission was granted on the basis of remediating the site. Works to remediate the site happened very much at the last minute, and now the applicant is coming back and asking for a time extension because they're doing everything at the last minute. I would also say that whilst we've been informed that it's not material to this consideration, I'd argue and say it is material to this consideration. There is still a large number of outstanding elements of that original application that need to come before committee. So the option we have is we could extend it and we could look at those individual elements as they come back, or we could refuse the extension. We could put pressure on the developer and the site owner to actually ensure that they get their act together quickly rather than leaving it to the last minute, as they have done all the way through this process. Or they can come back and we can assess the viability of the development with all of this information together. We now have a site that has undergone the remediation. I think anybody who drives past the site will say that the site looks much better. You don't see the big spoil heap. You don't see the mist rising in the snow. It actually has been a really good job. And I think the company that came in to do the remediation worked very well with the community. And a lot of the concerns the community had about that remediation were dealt with by the company that came in. But I think now we need to actually say to the owner of the site that either you get your act together with the developer and work within the planning permission that you were granted, the time frame you were granted, or we will look at it all together when it comes back and assess viability of the site then. I'm glad to hear that they have got a developer on board. It's good to see that that's happened. I think that's a bit unfair to judge that Keele Parish Council made the comment about the developer. It's probably because they were unaware, because the owners haven't really kept the community all that informed about what's going on. So I don't think that Keele Parish Council's comments could be considered to be untrue or unjust in that case. But personally, I would move refusal of the extension of the timeframe on the basis that the developer has had plenty of time and that they have started a lot of the work required for this much late on within their planning permission, and that the situation they now face themselves in is the situation of not acting early on when that permission was granted. So on those grounds, I would move refusal.
Any further comments from members? I see if our officer wishes to comment, and I would, well, before I make my comment, I'll take Councillor Northcott, who's indicated he'd wish to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a long saga, and we hear quite often that developers leave it to the last minute to get things moving again, to make sure that their planning permissions are up to date. We've seen it very recently with an application that came through in my ward in Tadgedale Quarry. And I think, you know, that this borough has got a shortage of brownfield sites to develop housing. This is an indication of the keenness of the developer to work to get this site, bring this site into the fore by extinguishing the fires that were on the site. I'm not sure I can actually support Councillor Jones's position on this. I feel that in the light of COVID and the people movements that were prevented from dissuading several building and developing companies from actually operating during lockdown, I think was an exceptional circumstance. So I think it's not unreasonable that we consider the extension to this. It's not, they're not asking for 1 million years. They're looking for a small extension to the proposed time. And I think as a planning authority and a planning committee, I think we should look on the count of fairness of what's been done to date, what intends to be done. And I'm reassured by the applicant saying that there has been a buyer now for this site, because we all like to see these schemes where they're appropriate to come to their fruition. And I'm afraid that I can't support Councillor Jones's position on this, so I would be moving to approve this, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was a lot of concern by the residents when this development came before us. A lot of argument against giving permission for these properties to be built. And just before I do second Councillor Jones, what would be the consequences of refusing any more time? Where would that leave us? as a council, and actually the developer, if the developer didn't do anything on time. Thank you.
And I'll ask our officers to reply to that. And what I was going to ask, I'll bundle in with it because I think it's relevant, is just to inquire that I'm correct in thinking that that there have been quite a lot of lockdown restrictions placed on the construction industry in this previous period.
Right, I'll answer the latter question first. There have been restrictions, and certainly the restrictions, the COVID-related restrictions has made developers reluctant or slow to commit to development of sites. I mean, I remind members that the outline planning permission was submitted by a company who never had the intention of carrying out the development on the site. They sought to gather a site together and promote it, and as part of that process, we secured the mitigation of the burning spoil heap that was put out at considerable expense of the developer. So yeah, so that factor, the burning spoil heap, was clearly initially a deterrent to house builders in taking on the site. That's quite a significant and fairly unusual site constraint. So the owners, or the applicant, took it upon themselves to commit the considerable financial cost in carrying out that mitigation work to make the site more attractive to developers. And unfortunately, once that work was done, shortly afterwards, the COVID restrictions hit us, and negotiations and difficulties arose in obtaining a developer for the site. But it's pleasing to hear that developer has now been identified. So if the application before you was refused tonight, the consequences of that would be inevitably that the requirements to carry out a viability reappraisal would take place, because there is no doubt that the requirements to have substantially commenced the development, and that is defined within the Section 106, can't be achieved by the current date of the 25th of September this year, a matter of days away from here. And the definition of substantial commencement is the construction of 10 dwellings up to slab level, and the construction to base course of the road serving. It's quite a significant amount of building works, and it's not possible to achieve that within the days available, particularly as there are some pre-commencement conditions that you've yet to be satisfied, as has been highlighted. So the consequence would be that reappraisal would have to take place, and that would create a level of uncertainty as to and potentially could result in the developer that's been secured walking away from the development, because it opens a question of what contributions could be made. I mean, there's no reason to think that the conclusions would be any different, that this site could support more contributions than were secured, given the excessive abnormal costs involved. But it does create that level of uncertainty, and developers are notoriously uncomfortable with uncertainty. They like things to be clear, and yes, so we could result in this site not being developed. But that is yes, speculation.
Could I ask a second question of our officers, please? And that is about the recommendation, which we see the modification sought is to provide an additional 9 months to the development. Am I correct in thinking that is a period of time devised by the officers, that there is no formal mechanism, so to speak? So again, this committee could propose 6 months if it thought appropriate, or indeed a year if it thought appropriate. I just explore the rationale behind the 9 months. Perhaps there is a formula that I'm not aware of.
Well, the 9 months was the additional period of time that was requested by the applicant within the application. They have subsequently come back to us with a little bit more information as to why they consider 9 months is necessary. So the indication is that the contract with Seddon is subject to them securing a 9-month extension, and if that happens, they will purchase the site at the end of September. The sale of the site is conditional on the 9-month extension. So yes, Seddon would not be committed to purchasing the site if the decision wasn't made tonight. And then following completion of the purchase, Seddon has been indicated, submit a Section 73 application to vary the house types so that the house types that are approved are their house types. And there will be a period of time within which that application will have to be processed and a decision made. And there are still some site remediation works, including the requirement to take down overhead cables and create a site access. And that will take from January to late March as a minimum, we are advised. And then at that point, they will then be in the position to carry out works that would meet the definition of substantial commencement. As I say, that is the construction of foundations of 10 plots and the roads up to base course to serve those 10 plots. So that is taken up to pretty much the 9 months. So they have given themselves what they consider is sufficient time to enable a substantial commencement to be completed and no more than that. So if you were, as a committee, decide, and you are entitled to reduce that 9 months to 6 months, then there is a high likelihood that substantial commencement wouldn't be completed in the revised period, as is the case with the period that is currently in place.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I think really to just clarify my point, I appreciate the officer's comments. I think that's been exceptionally helpful. I think the reality is that this development has a affordable housing allocation or requirement that is very generous, that took into account the nature of the site and the remediation work that needed to take place. I think I'm quite concerned that the reason that our officers stated a time period for that to be reevaluated is to take account of what happens with the housing market. I agree that the pandemic has had an impact in certain aspects of construction, but I think what we have seen is that house prices have risen quite astronomically in the last 6 months. And as a consequence, the viability of the development and the social housing contribution might be significantly higher than that we set, which is one of the reasons that we do this with a time frame. So my reason for objecting to an extension of the time frame is that we're not denying the application. We are simply saying that if it's going to take you longer, then you will have to submit a viability, or you'll have to submit to a viability assessment for the potential additional social housing contribution. I don't think that's unfeasible. I don't think that is against what we as a council should be doing. We should be seeking to secure, as we dealt with an application earlier on that was rejected for those reasons, that we felt that the 106 contribution didn't negate the pain of the development. And I do think that, you know, the applicant has a time frame. If they wish to avoid a revaluation, then this could have happened a lot earlier. But if they're not going to, it's simply a revaluation over the amount of social housing contribution. I don't see a problem with that. I see this as us as a committee securing the borough's future in terms of social housing provision, which is what we should be doing. So I will move my objection on those reasons, that the time frame exists on the basis of purely the evaluation of the viability of how much social housing needs to be provided by the site or contributed to financially, and hope that there's a seconder.
I think Councillor Williams had already indicated he wished to second. a motion of refusal. But if I'm wrong, please correct me, Councillor.
I just think it's a compromise here to say if we did give them extra time, that would be the end of it. I'm just concerned that we've seen it in the past, and it has happened where we pushed developers and they've come on site and put the platforms down to the properties and then moved off and just left it long. So we're stuck in between that, like in a hard place. Listening to the officers and what Councillor Jones has just said, I'm for, giving them more time, but I think a question mark on how much after that time is up. Do we say that's it? Are we in a position to do that? Thank you.
That's a very good point, Councillor. I'll ask our officers. I mean, we have said before, I mean, I'm not sure we can enforce such a position legally, but I dare say we could append a note to our decision saying that the committee is not minded to give any further extensions after this one. Again, I look to our officers to just clarify the position legally and what we can and we cannot do.
Well, yes, you can express that to the applicant, that any further applications to extend are unlikely to be favourably received. You can't prevent someone applying to various conditions to Section 106 in this way, but such an application would be brought to Planning Committee for a decision. So you will have, as Planning Committee, the ability to refuse that application if you consider that there are no justifications for any further extensions to that trigger. So yes, I mean, I'm sure the applicant will be listening to what's said and will be unlikely to pursue an application to extend further. But yes, there's nothing to prevent that from happening. But you are the ultimately the decision maker for this application and any future such application.
And I'm correct in thinking, aren't I, that we could append that point in our minutes as well, so that this would be a printed record of our proceedings this evening.
Yes, that could be noted within the minutes.
Right. Are there any other comments from members before we proceed to voting on this issue? Now, as I've said before, I'm sort of unhappy when people vocalise a point of view to have no vote through a technicality. As such, I am happy, but without prejudice, and personally, I will not be voting for this motion. I think it's very important this development go ahead, but I am happy to second Councillor Jones's motion, as I say, without prejudice, on the grounds that I think a vote should be taken. Councillor Jones wishes this application to be refused. Could I see, please, those in favour of refusal for the grounds he stated? And I see 4. I think I look to our clerk to confirm that. Could I see those against refusal? And I see 8. So that motion, it falls. I am happy to move from the chair that we accept this recommendation with the rider that we send a note to the developer that this committee is most unlikely to agree to any further extension. And I would ask our clerk to minute that rider so that there is a written record of this point at this juncture. Could I see those in favour, please, of the recommendation with that small addition? And I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. Is that correct? And those against? I see 2. So that motion is carried. We'll now move back to the order of the agenda as printed, which I hope my memory is still good enough to tell me that that is item 7. I look with trepidation to our officers to make sure that that's correct. So again, we have a small supplementary report on this item. We have no public speakers, and I look to our officers to see if there's anything we need to know before we commence our debate.
No, it's all within the report. Thank you.
In that case, I look to members for comment. Councillor Northcott.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. After consultations have been heard from the Loggerheads Parish Council, I see no reason here to delay this any further. I'd be happy to recommend that we accept this and approve it. Thank you.
Councillor Panther, then Councillor Holland.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I can support Councillor Northcott's comment, and then I will second his recommendation.
Councillor Holland. You've
nothing to add.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Brevity, as they say, is the soul of wit. Any further contribution from members on this item before I put it to the vote? Could I then see those in favour of the recommendation? And I think that is unanimous. We can progress to item 8. And again, I look to our officer to make sure that there's nothing extra we need to know before we proceed to our debate.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing further to report. Thank you.
Again, I look to members. I think myself that condition 7 is probably the most important of these conditions. Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to raise, I'm largely in support of this application, but item 7, I'd like some comments from officers about when determining the occupation required for dwelling. Is it normal to include forestry alongside agriculture? Looking through the application, I can see why the provision of the additional housing will be needed for management of the farm and for provision there. It entirely makes sense. I'm not aware why forestry has been included. We've had a number of situations where these occupancy requirements have been flexed to enable usage of these properties beyond what they have been intended for, which has caused some headaches for the local communities. And therefore, I'd like to make sure that we get this absolutely clear. Is there a requirement for forestry? Because I can't see that within the report for why that would be a requirement when agricultural meets all of the requirements of the occupation of the person within the dwelling.
Unfortunately, I can't answer that query. I look to my colleagues to see if they know a reason why forestry's always been included as a standard.
Yes, I think I can help. There is an acceptance or an acknowledgement within national planning policy that houses in rural areas, in greenbelt areas, where residential development wouldn't normally be accepted, can be justified for certain rural activities, which include agriculture and forestry. In this particular case, the case that has been advanced to justify the house is an agricultural case. They've demonstrated that there is an agricultural need for this property. And that is the basis upon which the application has been accepted. But the requirement, well, the inclusion of the reference to forestry within the condition means that it is more likely at a future date, should the needs of the requirements of this particular agricultural holding change, and there's no justification, or there's no requirement for an agricultural occupant, worker to occupy it, that we're more likely to be able to retain it with a restriction, because it widens the pool of people who could move into it without a variation of condition. So yeah, it is quite standard to cover the two rural activities.
Councillor Jones would like to make a comment.
I think if we were looking at viability, we'd include district nurses, because I suspect there's probably just as many district nurses as there are tree surgeons in the area. But I'd propose that we remove forestry, and it's well within the application. It's for somebody to live in the property associated with the work of the farm. Agriculture is a suitable term for the nature of that, and should the business change in the future, then it's well within their right to come back to us to ask for a variation of that, to include forestry should there suddenly be a planting of trees on the farm that requires a tree surgeon on site. I would be inclined to be quite supportive of that. So I don't see why we need to include forestry, unless what I was expecting was if the officers were to tell me that this is something that the MPF states you should include, you should always include agriculture and forestry, then I would of course say then we shouldn't really modify that. But if this is something that's open to committee to decide on, I don't see why forestry needs to be included.
Councillor Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question really to our officers. Could we be a little bit prescriptive in terms of removing the permitted development rights? Because one thing to agree to a person working in the estate and the agriculture and forestry capacity, but I wouldn't like to see an erodement into the green belt from extraneous buildings that may appear or not. Thank you.
I look to our officer for an answer to that question.
Thank you, Chair. As is set out in agenda item 9, which is for replacement dwelling in the greenbelt, inspectors rarely conclude that the removal of permitted development rights there's an exceptional circumstance for doing that. And there's been numerous cases where permitted development rights have been recommended by a local planning authority, and the inspector has said that removal is not justified. Whilst that being the case, members obviously could, if they've got concerns in terms of future extensions, outbuildings, etc. In this instance, remove those permitted development rights, but it's not a condition that the officers can recommend in this particular instance. Thank you.
So just like the condition about forestry, the committee could remove the forestry and propose removing permitted development rights were it minded to do so. Now that I think is worth bearing in mind. Any further comment from members? Councillor Holland.
I guess I'm okay with removing forestry. I mean, are people likely to dress up as lumberjacks in order to take occupancy of this property? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I agree, though, with the removal of permitted development rights. I'd be content to pass this as it was originally phrased, but if people are very upset about the idea of forestry being part of the occupancy condition, then we can have that out.
Am I to take it that's seconding Councillor James's proposal, Councillor Holland?
Yes.
Thank you. That's a straight answer to a straight question, which I praise you for. I don't see any appetite for removing permitted development rights. Again, I just want to make sure that that is the case.
It was a question, Chair, not a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. In that case, I'm going to take a vote on slightly amended recommendation that we remove the words, I think, and forestry from the recommendation. Could I see those in favour with that slight amendment, please? That is nearly unanimous. I have a feeling Councillor Reddish is against it, but I think she's also a solitary voice. Am I correct in saying that? Otherwise, yes, so passed by an overwhelming majority, I think it's fair to say. No, Councillor, you've been terse and to the point so far. So let's not stray from the straight and narrow, and progress. We'll progress to item 9, I think, on our agenda. And again, I look to our officer to see if there's any further material. There is no supplementary on item 9.
Nothing further, Chair. Thank you.
And I open the item for comment. If there is no comment, could I see, please, those in favour of the recommendation? And that, I think, this time is unanimous. We can progress to item 10. And again, you'll see this time there is, in fact, a supplementary for the item. I'll look to our officer to again ask whether there's any further information we require this evening.
Thank you. Nothing further.
And once again, as you can see, it's a twofold recommendation. I invite comment from members. I see those in favour of those recommendations. That again, I think, passes unanimously. We've already dealt with item 11, so we'll move on to item 12 on our agenda. As you can see, it's some of the receipt of information. I again look to our officer to see if there is any further information on this matter.
Well, the position remains the same with regard to the planning inspectorate. We still haven't received any further correspondence, and we haven't received a date for the hearing. But I can advise that a visit to the site has taken place today, and there is some activity on the site. There are caravans and there are people in residence on the site. So that is a recent change. I think that's happened in the last couple of days. So I can report that.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moulton. Councillor Jones.
Just to thank the officers for the heartening, very brief and to the point report on the activity at the site, and unfortunately the disheartening news of the activity verbally reported just now. But just to thank the officers, it is appreciated. It is important for us when residents are raising with us about activity at the site to be able to reference these reports and show them the documented record. So I thank the officers for their diligence in this.
And to go on from the councillor's comments, I certainly think it would be useful. I look to colleagues to see if they agree. And once again, I think this should come back not at our next, but our following meeting. Our members agreeing with me that should be the case. Yep. So if we bring that back, not at the next meeting, but at the following meeting as a rolling item. That brings us to item 13, rather long item, as you can see, on validation requirements. I ask our officers if they wish to comment on this, and then I'll open it for comment from the floor.
No, I don't think there's anything I'd like to say at this stage. Thank you.
So I invite comment from members on something which is fairly technical. I mean, quite a lot of this is paragraphs of the MPPF have changed in between times, and that obviously will have to be adjusted. I'm unsure there's anything of major import here, but I may have missed something. So if members feel that I have, please, this is the moment to comment now. Are we? Oh, sorry, Councillor Reddish.
No, I think we just received the report.
So as the councillor suggested, are we content that we receive this information? Yeah.
The recommendation is to approve to the revision. So
no, in that I stand corrected. So are we happy with the recommendation as printed? I do apologise to our officers. Yep. Okay. We can then progress to item 14, our half-yearly report on planning obligations. And again, I don't know whether our officers wish to speak to this item. I think the answer is no, so I invite
sorry,
comment.
Chair, no,
sorry,
you.
Mr. Bromley.
Sorry, no, thank you.
So I invite comment from members. And this time, I think we simply do receive the information, hopefully I don't get it wrong twice in a row, are members content to do so? That then brings us to our last item, which is to consider any urgent business as defined by the relevant section of the relevant Act. I know of none myself. I look to our officers to see if I am correct in knowing of none. And that has been confirmed. And that means we can bring this meeting to a close. Thank you very much for your attendance. Again, I think we've had a good debate this evening, and I thank you very much for that as well.